This is subscriber Q&A number 8, and it's been an average of just over 16 days per episode of these. So my initial claim that they were coming every week has just been completely subverted, but I guess if I do them once every week from now on, we'll get somewhere close to it. I'm not going to make any promises because I always break my promises, and so none of you should trust me anyway. So let's get on with it. Let's get down into the action with a thematic one to begin with. Formation asks, "Hello Sideshow, this is a message in a bottle thrown into the ocean at 2020 AD. This was the only known method capable of contacting you. I just wanted to ask a quick question. When will you be back? You promised to leave the Discord just for a quick minute while you went to get smokes." Listen, I think there's a question later on, actually. I've picked out, I tend to do this I pick out my favorite questions from the subscriber Discord, which, if you're a sub to my Twitch channel, you can go and ask questions. I'll occasionally answer questions just in text if they're very quick, and have a quick answer, but most of the time I'll do them here, or sometimes I'll make a special video like the one about how to get into esports, where I spent an hour tackling one question. But there's a question later on that's something about burnout. Essentially, my way of dealing with burnout is that if there are certain projects that if I've taken on too much work and I feel burnt out with the amount of work, I'll just start cutting stuff. I'll just start not doing stuff. I never get burnt out because I just refuse to do stuff at some point. I'm just fuck it, not going to do that today. So that's my method of dealing with it, and that's why I haven't been doing these, is that they're the easiest thing to delay and put off while you're doing more interesting things like socializing or drinking alone. MorphyAU says, "Do you watch, listen to, or read any Overwatch content during your free time to study or research for your job? Is there anything you recommend?" Yeah. I was talking to Doa about this recently. And Doa was going through the same period when he was doing StarCraft that a few of us are going through when we do Overwatch. You know, it's your first big game. It's how you get into esports. You get in your first professional job. And he said he didn't really do that much specific prep for each day, for each match, but because he was consuming so much StarCraft content all the time, his life was prep. Life was prep. He was just prepping all the time without being specifically focused, okay, I'm going to allocate 3 hours to tackle this one match. He's just naturally thinking, talking, engaging in so much StarCraft content that his entire life was just prepping for his job. That's what I feel like a little bit, and have been for the last couple of years, is that I watch and listen and watch and listen to and read so much Overwatch content that, yeah, I mean, it doesn't feel like study or research. It just feels like that is my life. My life is just consuming Overwatch content and a few other things that I do on the side. But that's my life revolves around Overwatch. And so what kind of stuff? I mean, I watch or read all of the stuff that comes out of the team. So any team announcements, any team content that gets produced and tweeted about, I like to watch, like the Custom News Network stuff, the social media pieces that people make. The player profile pieces that certain teams make, there was a couple, there was one about Stitch a while back that the Vancouver Titans have made, where they go through every player and talk about their lives outside of Overwatch and what they did beforehand, stuff like that. NYXL did a couple of those. San Francisco Shock make fairly regular, more comedic content, but I like that as well because it gets you more in tune with how the players think and act and that kind of stuff. I mean, not so much for the San Francisco guys because I talk to them anyway and I know how they are, but some of the other teams are a little harder to reach or have personalities that don't come across as well when you talk to them or when you watch them on camera. So for those people, it can be very useful to read interviews with them or see content that's produced either on their Twitch or on the team YouTube channels or something that can give you a better idea of what their personality is like and how to big them up or interact with them or get a feel for how they work within a team system. Podcasts are also pretty interesting. At the moment, I'm very focused on making a lot of podcasts, so I make, I say I make as if I'm the person fucking in charge of it, but I contribute to Plat Chat and Foreheads, although that isn't really an Overwatch podcast. But then a bunch of other content on the side as well, like I'm trying to stream as much as I can. If I have the option of listening to a 1 hour podcast or streaming for an extra hour, I will tend to go with the streaming. Podcasts are generally the only thing that I don't watch as much as I used to. I used to consume all of them all the time. But I find it a better use of my time at the moment to skim through things, and because all I'm looking for really is ideas anyway. I'm looking for ideas that spark ideas of my own. I'm not really listening to other people's analysis to parrot it or to learn. I'm more interested in using it as inspiration for my own ideas, which you don't need to listen to somebody's fully fleshed out argument most of the time. If they're a reasonable person, like a lot of the players are, a lot of the journalists working around the scene, a lot of the casters and talent involved in the scene, you can basically get an idea of what their thought is just from the keynotes. Just from what someone tweets on Twitter or just from talking to them at a bar, you can get the general gist of it. You know, if someone says X is the best player in the world on this role and gives you like a couple of reasons, you don't have to dig really in deep into it. I already know how general people model Overwatch, and so I can understand where they're coming from, and it might spark ideas of their own, of my own. So I'm not as religious with watching or listening to all of Oversight anymore, or all of Tactical Crouch, so I would definitely recommend those podcasts for people that have the time and want to engage with that kind of stuff. Most people come from a different place than I do. Obviously, I'm not really involved in Overwatch as a fan so much as somebody that wants to create content for fans, so it's a bit of a different scenario, I think, for me compared to other people. I like to read interviews, particularly with Overwatch talent, but I think interviews are one of the things that are done the most poorly at the moment in Overwatch. So, yeah, although those are very easy to skim through and try and find out interesting stuff inside them, I can read maybe 5 interviews and find 1 or 2 things that I didn't know that are interesting to me. Obviously, the people that work for the Overwatch League and tend to post on overwatchleague.com get the better interviews because they've actually got the people they're interviewing in person rather than engaging with them over Discord, whether that be through voice or through text. It's just a worse medium for being able to gather unique thoughts from people unless you're a very good interviewer. Anyway, okay. Precoixious asks, how at liberty do you feel to be able to criticize the game or Blizzard or Activision? She put in brackets. She? Actually, I'm not 100% sure. Well, they put in brackets. Or is answering this question possibly going to get a talk from HR? Now, I've never had a talk from HR. We're actually in an interesting position within the Overwatch League. I'm not going to say within Blizzard because we're not Blizzard employees. I tend not to discuss what Blizzard is doing at all, really, and certainly not Activision because I'm not on the inside of those. I don't know what moves they're making or what budgets they're working with, what projections they've got, what their end goals are for various things. I think it's almost silly of me to act as if I could give informed opinions on what Blizzard is up to as a company. But, you know, Overwatch the game and Overwatch League, the product and the matches themselves and the production of the events, I feel in a good place to be able to criticize, actually, and frequently do behind the scenes. But there's a difference between criticizing something out in the open and criticizing something behind the scenes, because there are rarely times at which criticism in a public forum is better if you're on the inside of the company. Because if I want to tell someone to improve X and X inside, which we do all the time, it's far better for me to actually go and tell the person that needs to improve it in person, rather than tweet about it, hope they see it, hope it, gains some public traction and forces their hand. I could just go to them and tell them that this is my opinion, and that I don't think the product is good in this particular way, and to improve it. As for the game itself, that was more for Overwatch League. For Overwatch the game, and maybe some slight stuff that I might disagree with Blizzard, but I can't actually think of anything. I mean, there was the big drama about like the layoffs and stuff, but again, that's the kind of thing that I don't feel comfortable commenting on because I don't really know the games industry that well. I don't feel like I work in the games industry. I feel like game development is a totally separate kind of world, like shadowy entity that I don't really have the expertise to be able to comment on. We just kind of work tangentially related to those people in that industry. So I don't tend to comment on that kind of stuff because I don't know enough to be able to give informed opinions. And I feel like anybody that follows me would expect an informed opinion. I don't want to be putting stuff out into the world where I'm just another pleb screaming into the void. Otherwise, I mean, what the fuck use is that of my platform? But for the game, for Overwatch the game, I feel perfectly comfortable criticizing it because that I feel is just I don't feel like we have to defend the game just because we're involved in the game. I mean, who are we defending it against? It's not like people are going to take it personally and cry. There are ways of giving constructive criticism, and certainly when I talk to the developers directly, I'm not just going to say, your game is shit, you got to fix it or whatever. Like, I do see some people tweeting. But the idea that I would feel unable to criticize the game, I think, is incorrect. Now, there are a couple of situations where that doesn't happen, though. That generally refer to the league. Now, if a decision has been made, and it's on, for example, the Watchpoint desk or something to discuss and be spokespeople for that change. Now, we're not supposed to be official league spokespeople, but when people tune into the broadcast, they are essentially viewing us as official league spokespeople, because we are the people telling them what changes have happened and what potential effect that might have on the game. For instance, large patch changes, format changes, decisions on discipline and stuff like that. That is not the forum, in my opinion. That is not the forum for me to be giving my opinions as critically as possible. That's more something that I would do on stream, on Twitter, or something like that. When I'm part of the Watchpoint desk and they ask me to talk about in totality let me try and think of a good example. Like, okay, we just released the format for 2020, generally speaking, with the double homestand model. If I have, not that I do, by the way, I actually think this is the fucking best model that you could possibly make at the moment, considering all of the factors at place. But say I personally believed that it should have 100% been home and away games. Every Dallas game is either played at Dallas or at their opponents where they're playing it. You know what I mean? Like classic home and away games. You're either playing in Dallas or you're playing at your opponent's arena. And there's nothing else. If I thought that was the only way that the Overwatch League should be run, then I think it would be unprofessional of me to get on the Watchpoint desk and argue that point, unless it was a horrific misstep by the league, and I felt that I could give my point very fairly while still being professional with it. But it's very rare that would be the case. It's more so that those are the instances where you not expect, well, I suppose expected to toe the party line in some sense, but just present the argument is essentially then what my job is. If I'm on the broadcast, my job is to present the argument for both sides and be fair and rational about it. It's not to force my opinion across. At that point, I suppose I am a pundit where people normally tune in to hear my opinions on things, hear my opinions on teams and stuff like that. But because I work for the league, it becomes more presenting the arguments for and against, and saying how reasonable the conclusion is, rather than doing that. And you may see that in the future as well. If there are changes with the league that I disagree with, I might be quite vocal about the parts that I disagree with on Twitter, on my own stream, this kind of stuff. But if it comes to the main broadcast itself, that then isn't really the time for me to be on a soapbox talking about the problems I perceive to be wrong with the league. They've just chosen the desk to give that overview of what the changes are, what the pros and the cons are. It's not so much my personal soapbox, and I think it would be unprofessional for me to view it as such. So there you go, just some of the intricacies. It's also interesting because the most traditional sports don't have the broadcaster be attached or owned by the entity that runs the league. Like, for example, the NFL is broadcast by outside entities like fucking Fox or ESPN or whatever. Those companies are not owned by the NFL. But in esports, and particularly in the Overwatch League and the Riot model with the League of Legends as well, the developer owns the rights to the game, the league itself, and the broadcast team. So it's easy from the outside to see that how that could end up just being a massive circle jerk where everybody just talks good about everybody. And it's been difficult for us, or not difficult, but it's been a challenge for us, and it's been on us to, as professional broadcasters, to separate ourselves from the league's point of view on certain things, or from the team's point of view. I mean, the teams are essentially the people paying to run the Overwatch League, right? It's like a system where the league is working in partnership with the teams for the health of the league. That's what the franchise system is. So if a team comes to the league and is like, Sideshow said, my team is shit, I feel like this is really unfair, then I can either say, okay, that is unfair, I'll just parrot propaganda from the teams the entire time, or I can hold down my own opinion. But there are times to have that opinion and times to present the argument as it is, and leave any personal opinions, positive or negative, out of it, and just represent the argument fairly. Anyway, to a more lighthearted question, Tygur Triple says, is a hot dog considered a sandwich? Now, I don't even know why this is a question. A sandwich is a blanket term for any edible thing between two slices of bread, whatever that bread is. If that bread is a fucking hot dog bun, if that bread is a burger bun, a brioche thing, if it's just a slice of bread, if you get two ends of a loaf and ram a sausage in between, you've made a shit sandwich, but you have made a sandwich. So yes, a hot dog is a sandwich. Now, the only argument I can see against that is that a hot dog bun is often connected at the bottom, right? Like this. And so it's kind of nestled in between. But that's still a sandwich because the innards are contained on two sides by bread, so that when you bite into it, you get bread, meat, or whatever the fuck is in your hot dog. Maybe you're a vegetarian hot dog eater. You got bread, filling, bread. That is the definition of a sandwich to me, and yes, hot dog falls squarely inside the realm of sandwich. MorphyAU says, powerful footwear power rankings. Footwear that screams authority. This was in reference, I think, to Bren wearing slides and socks on the broadcast, which is a travesty. An actual fucking travesty. Right? There are only some types of footwear that I do not get whatsoever. So I'm going to start at the bottom and I'm going to work upwards, because I have more opinions about bad footwear in my, like, what I consider to be bad footwear than good footwear. Slides or sandals and socks are just awful. I mean, I think at this point they're worn kind of ironically, as if I know they look weird and it's like mega casual and comfy, and fuck you for thinking you need to look good all the time. Like, I think that's the kind of vibe that the Gen Z slides and socks wearers are going for, but it just looks crap to me. It looks really weird. It's an odd blend. I mean, those are shoes that are designed to be open for your feet so that your feet can, like, breathe more, and yet you're wearing socks with them. I just don't understand it, especially if, I mean, fuck me. Don't even get me started. All right. The other ones, though, that I'm not a big fan of are the all the rage these days, which are the brightly colored, like, in your fucking face, bright sneakers. I don't get them. And, like, bright green, bright red, and white sneakers with kind of abstract patterns on them that are deliberately ugly, but are cool because they're ugly? I don't know. I don't get it at all. They remind me of, like, the fucking box cars. You know, the cars that are just deliberately, like, lumps and fucking boxes, like the sugar cube thing, and the ones that, I don't know, it looks like someone took a decently designed car and just inflated it with air. Yeah, it's like deliberately ugly for the sake of being cool, to stand out. I don't know. Don't fucking get it. I'm not a sneaker person in general, though, but I do like, or at least appreciate, the look of stuff like fucking, I don't know, like the NMDs and the Yeezys and stuff like that. At least they look fairly decent, and they're subtle. But I'm not a fan of the deliberately bright, ugly looking shoes. Do not get it. Do not get it. In my opinion, the greatest footwear is like, I don't even know how to describe it. I don't know the right words to describe it. But you know, like classic dress shoes, like your Oxford or Brogue dress shoes, like a brown kind of, not quite tapered point, but long point. Those, fucking lovely. Get me in a pair of those any day. I like boots as well. Leather boots, fantastic. Sign me the fuck up. What else? The small kind of fucking, I don't know. Don't even know what they're called. Like the canvasy plimsoll kind of things that look more casual. I don't fucking know. I'm not a shoe kind of guy. Footwear that screams authority, though. Give me the proper dress shoes any day of the week. Precoixious says, what is the right amount of meta shift per season? Oh boy. On one hand, I'm sure no one wants to watch 4 stages of the same 6 heroes. But on the other hand, having the playoffs meta suddenly shift in your favour after a less than dominant regular season feels somewhat cheap. I completely agree with the idea of changes right before the end of the season feeling very cheap. I think it cheapens the rest of the season to have major meta shifts right before the playoffs. And it creates a huge amount of variability and undermines the previous part of the season. But I don't think that the league, or basically any esport, frankly, is in a position to dictate meta shifts because they're just owned and run by the developers. There is no say in, generally speaking, there is no say in which patch you run. You run the patch that's most up to date. Now, in the Overwatch League, there's like a grace period, right? But it's very rare that we would play on a patch that's like 4 months earlier just to keep everything on the same patch. Like, I don't think that's reasonable because you want the game to be as closely aligned with what you see in the league itself. Otherwise, it just becomes an alien product to people who are watching. You're playing at home, you're playing a totally different game. So unless the developers purposely sync up their patch cycles with whatever league happens to be running, which could be detrimental for the overall health of the game as well, I don't think it's necessarily something that you can always control. Like the other thing to mention here as well is that it might only be a small perceived balance change. And yet, the actual effect on the meta might be drastic. So say, for example, you do have a developer that says, all right, we're actually, in the second half of the season, we're going to try and keep things as minimal as possible. We're going to balance a couple of heroes that just feel either crazy powerful or crazy underworked for the general populace, for the casual player base. But we're not going to make major meta shifts. And so, for example, you take a hero that isn't used that much. What's even an example at the moment? Every hero is being used. Let's say, let's use some prior examples that have already been done. So like the Hanzo rework, or the Torb rework, or the Sim rework, or something like that. A hero that really wasn't getting much playtime beforehand, that just gets, from some degree, minorly to extremely tweaked, or like if they redesign Moira at the moment, for example, perhaps they redesign Moira and they think, oh, here's just a small tweak to her numbers so that she can do a bit more healing. It's inherently unpredictable what will happen to the meta because there's so many different factors all contributing and confounding each other, so that if you did make a small change to up Moira's healing, it may just make certain compositions incredibly powerful. Ones that previously couldn't exist because there wasn't enough sustain. Something like the Brig is taken out of triple tank, triple support, and you play a Hanzo with it instead, and you only have 2 healers. That composition at the moment has very little sustain and just kind of gets bullied as long as you can mitigate the Hanzo's damage. But if you had the Moira to be able to sustain all of the tank line, there is a world perhaps in which that would become a dominant meta. Now, I'm giving you a kind of bullshit example here, but the point is, whenever the patch changes, it's almost impossible to predict what the meta is going to be until you've scrimmed on it, until you've actually had some experience with it. So, trying to predict from a developer's point of view what changes will result in major or minor meta shifts is itself very difficult as well. Remember that enormous balance patch that happened between stages 1 and 2 of the Overwatch League? And it did nothing in stage 2, but yet there was major shifts between stage 2 and stage 3? I mean, the developers must be sat there scratching their heads like, well, did we fix that? Was that the map pool that fixed that? Did the players just figure it out now, but it was really balanced back then? Was GOATs ever dominant? And this composition that Shanghai Dragons have been running, was that always possible? Is it only because DM and Ding are so good that they're able to run that? Would it be able to be run by other teams? I mean, there are so many questions to be asked about that kind of stuff. And it's almost impossible to answer because you don't have control subjects. You don't have the entirety of the league playing one patch while a mirror version of the league plays another patch, and you can say, oh yeah, it was actually this that made the difference, or whatever. Now, let me address this from a what do you call it, idealistic point of view, though. The question was, what is the right amount of meta shift per season? So, in my ideal world, this is how I'd like it to run. There is a general theme in each stage, and that theme doesn't have to deviate away too far from one stage to the other, but it makes the game fresh. And that is what we had last year, and people still complained their fucking asses off about how dive was dominant. I don't know what the fuck they were watching, but at the beginning of the year, we had some teams playing dive and some teams playing Junkrat Widowmaker anti-dive, almost as far away as you can get while still playing the same two main tanks. And then you had teams later on in the season ditching the Mercy after she got nerfed, but then picking her back up again later on. We saw Widowmaker for the majority of Stage 3. Stage 4 had a lot of Brigitte in it, a lot more Lucio returning, double sniper, a bit more Junkrat. Last year was pretty varied in terms of how the metas played out from stage to stage, and I think the map pool had a big factor in how that worked, but also the patches that went in between. But people still got mad about it. This year, people got mad and then just, what's the word, like apathetic. They just gave up. But the meta did shift fairly drastically in stage 3, which, as I've said, there isn't a great understanding of why that happened. Various different theories, but nobody, I think, knows for sure. Was this season the right amount of meta shift? No, I would have liked to see GOATs be really dominant for one stage and see this stage 3 kind of stuff happen in stage 2, and then see a shift to maybe more DPS stuff or a mixture of it in stage 3. And then stage 4, perhaps something different as it goes on. But I think there are always going to be meta shifts, and as terrible as this argument is that the best teams in the world are ones which adapt, at some point that is just literally true. We know that there's going to be meta shifts because we know the developers are going to patch the game, and we know that the maps are going to change, and so teams do have to actually keep up with that. Should it be the same for 3 stages and change for the 4th? No, probably not. Not in an ideal world. I think that is counter to competitive integrity. But I think the answer to that moving forwards will be more so to shift the meta in stages 1 through 3, not to keep the meta stable through all 4 stages. I think it's simply going to be a fact of life with esports that are MOBA-esque, that you have meta shifts per block, whatever those blocks might be, whether it's half the season or whether it's a quarter of the season or whatever. WhiskeySwan says, horror movies, yay or nay? I'm going for a nay on horror movies. They don't really grab me. I find it hard to suspend my disbelief, and I don't really get involved in them. A couple of things don't bug me, but just take me out. My immersion is ruined in horror movies most of the time for a couple of reasons. One, I truly do not believe that anything that happens in most horror movies is possible in real life. Like, for example, when there's when there's horror movies about ghosts or about psychopathic killers or whatever that are just like rampaging through a town or something like that. Like, a lot of the setup and fundamental stuff, the premise that you have to buy into to make the horror movie seem realistic or seem like it would even be plausible, just I don't buy it. And that's a weird thing, you might say, for somebody like me that actually enjoys fantasy movies, like, for example, Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or something like that. But it's easier to or sci-fi movies as well. But it's easier to suspend your disbelief when you're asked to do it in a universe that isn't your own. You know, for those fantasy universes, you're not saying this is Earth in 2019 and this is happening and there are suddenly elves or any of that shit. It's very easy to put your brain into a brand new imaginary universe. But what a lot of horror movies do is they take the universe, the world that you currently inhabit, and they say, this is something that could happen or has happened, or, you know, that kind of thing. And that's where the disconnect happens for me, where I fail to suspend my disbelief. I think probably just because when I was watching them as a kid, was like probably like a coping mechanism of not getting too scared, was just reminding myself that it's not real. And for whatever reason, even now when I really try and like get into them, I'm more appreciative of them as art pieces rather than getting actually into them. I also don't get scared very much. I'm not a person that gets particularly scared or anxious or frightened or whatever. And even if I was, I'm not really sure why that would be particularly entertaining for people. So a big old nay on horror movies, honestly. I do enjoy watching them with other people, though. I enjoy watching horror movies or horror series with other people for their reactions, or ones that are more like psychological thrillers. I do very much enjoy those. MorphyAU. Given Fusion University's meteoric rise in contenders, presumably NA, what sort of squad do you see Fusion putting together in Season 3 to make themselves great again? That's a good question. Fusion University's rise has been fantastic, and I think that they would certainly be able to compete in the Overwatch League. I think that it's very difficult to know what will happen with any team moving into Season 3. And one of the reasons for that is the initial contracts that were signed with players tended to be 1+1 contracts, 2-year contracts from what has been reported. And if teams... Now, I don't know this, but I think a lot of players will have chosen to update their contracts at the end of 2018 and sign for larger amounts, for longer time periods, for whatever. But some people will have chosen not to re-sign so that they are free agents at the end of this year, at the end of 2019, and can go wherever they'd like to go once things start to become more regionalized, localized. Once the geolocation comes in as a big factor, they want to choose where they want to live. They feel like they have a good idea of their worth in the league. Maybe they thought they'd be an incredible free agent and just be up for auction and be able to make a huge amount more money, not signing a contract, taking lower pay in the second year, but for an incredibly high contract in the third. It's risky, but I'm sure some players have done that. Who knows which players that was, though, or which players teams will be able to hang on to. For Fusion in particular, their roster is a weird one because it has a lot of star potential, but the roster itself seems kind of dysfunctional. And at least from the rumors of like some kind of beef between Carpe and Fraggy, and the fact that Carpe and Sado are now the only Korean players on that roster, and the entire team doesn't seem to have the best teamwork in the world. They are a very individualistic team, and they have Alarm and Naste on the roster that they could bring up, but they would be at least... I find it very strange, because if you want to go with a majority Korean roster, you could try and bring Alarm and Naste up to the main roster, but you're replacing EQO, who's probably your best non-Korean player on that team, and if you want to go the opposite way, you're giving up Alarm. If you want to really focus on a Western roster, you're giving up on Alarm and Carpe as well. So I don't really know what the hell Fusion's going to do next year. If it was up to me, I would start bringing a lot of those Fusion Uni guys up. I would be looking for a team that is somewhat of a blend between the current Philadelphia Fusion and Fusion Uni, where you have something like Alarm, Neptuno, Sado, Bernard, and maybe Nice Carpe, something like that, or maybe EQO Carpe with Nice on the bench, and Snillo on the bench as well. I'm not totally sure, but that would be my idea of still having a mixed roster, but tending towards more Korean, and certainly bringing Alarm in. They have the players to be able to make themselves great, and they certainly have the scouting to be able to find those talents again for Fusion Uni. Pogey says, is the Outlaws versus Shock game the biggest upset in Overwatch history? If not, what is? Yes, I believe that is the biggest upset in Overwatch League history, at the very least. Biggest upset in Overwatch history? I don't know. I'd have to go back and try and think about every single upset that's happened. But because it was in a major tournament like the Overwatch League, and the Outlaws had been so phenomenally awful, they'd gone 0-7 in the previous stage, the Shock had gone undefeated, perfect, every single map won in the regular stage of that stage where Outlaws went 0-7, and then Outlaws come in and beat them. Yeah, I think that is hands down the biggest upset. Some of the other ones might be Atlanta Reign over the NYXL twice, and what else? I don't know. I mean, the other big upsets are more like playoff runs, like London's playoff run, London and Philly's playoff run last year, but not each individual upset. Formation says, you are approached by two teams to be their coach and must choose one or the other. Both want to become championship contenders, i.e. at least top 4. One team has an existing roster and staff, and you must figure out which players or staff to replace. The other wants you to pull together a roster and staff by yourself. Budget is not an issue in either case. Which team do you pick? Okay, so the question is essentially asking, which philosophy do you think is going to be more successful? Using my vision of what a roster and staff would look like, or taking an existing roster and staff and figuring out which to replace. Now, I think it depends massively on what the existing roster is. I mean, if you give me the Washington Justice, I was going to say Florida, but they're already making so many roster moves that, I mean, fuck knows. Actually, yeah, let's use Florida Mayhem. If you give me the Florida Mayhem and I have to figure out which players or staff to replace, I've got no clue, because they've got no clue. And I would probably end up just scrapping the whole team and starting again anyway. But if you gave me maybe Philly, as we were just talking about, or if you gave me, like, who's a team that isn't top 4 but would be punting for it? I suppose, like, either of the LA teams or something like that, then I would find that a much more interesting case and much more likely to have success than me building a roster on my own. There are just so many pitfalls you could fall into building a roster on your own. A lot of people have tried it. A lot of people who thought they were pretty smart have tried it and failed. If budget wasn't an issue, though, I think that stops you getting situations like Washington Justice and Florida Mayhem. I don't think, if budget wasn't an issue, I really struggle to see how I could properly fuck up. But I think if you're really aiming for top 4, the best chance you would have is to take a middle of the pack kind of team and then make changes from there. Particularly with the staff. I think staff is a big one. The hardest thing to tell from someone like a fan's point of view or a regular pundit, that's still pretty difficult from my point of view, even though I'm here in LA interacting with teams and players all the time, is figuring out which players have good attitude behind the scenes, which staff actually are any good at their jobs behind the scenes. There are a lot of people that get good credit that when you actually speak to the players that work with them, don't really do much at all, or are significantly worse than other people. And there's a lot of people in the scene that you might not have heard of, like the new Valiant coaches, for example, who are pretty highly talked about by their team. Or the San Francisco Shock coaches. And I don't just mean Krusty, I mean 9K and Junkbuck as well. 9K and Junkbuck could probably both go into head coaching positions with other teams, but because people haven't really heard of them that much, I don't think they're being thought of in that kind of way. Like, if you walked up to somebody and said, do you think, well, I mean, wasn't Junkbuck running for the NA coach, like Overwatch World Cup USA coach? That might be wrong, but I think he was. Or was it 9K? I don't know, actually. I think one of them's a Korean American, right? I don't know. I'm not going to look it up. But anyway, I think one of the Shock coaches was running for Team USA, and Aero was picked over the top of him. Now, if you ask me, the San Francisco Shock coaches are more qualified. And that's not, like, I'm not trying to slander Aero. I'm just saying that the San Francisco Shock coaches are phenomenal. And yet, public opinion you don't know of them that much. And that is one of the most difficult things, even for us, to be able to tell. So, yeah. I think I would try and work with a pre-existing roster, as long as it wasn't an absolute car crash, and I would have to just begin at the beginning anyway. Tygur Triple says, if OWL were to expand again, what other cities or organizations would you like to see come on board? I don't really know about organizations. I don't. I'm not the kind of person that keeps my finger on the pulse of the health of organizations in the wider esports scene. If you ask me to name big organizations involved in Dota that have their shit together that would be excellent recommendations to coming into Overwatch League, I honestly wouldn't know. I wouldn't know which are the absolute elite tier, really look after their teams, are phenomenally well working behind the scenes, and which are just big names but don't operate that well. I don't know. I'm not that kind of person. That's more Monte Cristo's kind of thing. But what other cities would I like to see come on board? I think there's some fairly obvious choices actually. If I was in charge of the expansion, you probably want another one in Korea, because Korea is just the mecca of Overwatch and esports in general. You already have Seoul, but I think Busan or something like that would be a natural choice. Korea's just got so much talent involved in it, and so much pre-existing esports infrastructure, and a desire for games to be held there. The homestand model that we've got currently, homestands that happen in LA, for example, when you have twice as many happening in LA, right? Because you have Valiant and you also have Gladiators, so you're actually going to get 4 homestands a year happening in Los Angeles rather than 2 that would happen in Atlanta, for example. The turnout for those homestands in LA might not be that big because Overwatch has lived in LA for so long, and there are twice as many, so it's less exclusive, so it might not be that big. But in Korea, when the majority of the games have been happening elsewhere in the world, and then suddenly you turn up with the Overwatch League matches happening in Korea, I cannot think of how they wouldn't sell out in an instant. I mean, it's just like an incredible market to get into. There are already a bunch of Chinese teams, but I could see another Chinese city coming on board there, just because it's a huge area for Overwatch. A lot of fans over there, a lot of money over there as well. But I also think if I was to pick idealistically, I would have say there were 4 spots that we're gonna expand to. Although Nate Nanter did say at one point that the end goal was 28 teams. I don't know whether that's changed. It was a long time since he said that, but that would mean another 8 spots. But let's say 4 for now, because that makes things a bit simpler. I'd have 1 in Korea. I would probably have another one in Europe as well, so that you have London, Paris, and 1 somewhere else in Europe. There's a lot of Overwatch fans in Europe. A lot of ways of being able to travel within continental Europe. You're really not that far away. And it's a big scene. So I'd probably put 1 in Busan, 1 in Berlin or something. I honestly have no idea. 1 somewhere else in Europe. And then I'd start thinking about the regions that are involved in contenders but aren't involved in the Overwatch League yet. So I would be thinking about South America in particular. South America's got a rabid fan base. They're not that big in terms of actual physical people, but they turn up. The viewership for stuff involving Brazilian teams and players in particular, but just generally South America, is pretty large. So if you were able to expand into South America, particularly Brazil, if you had one in like Rio or something, I think that would be huge. I think there are a couple of players in the Brazilian scene that, like Alamong's already in there as well, but there are a couple of other players in the Brazilian scene that would be reasonable pickups for a team that wanted to expand into South America. And it would be a boost to that scene, a boost to a scene that's actually doing pretty well and has a fever for it. The other possibility is something like Australia having like a Sydney team, but they would get utterly screwed in terms of actually being locally placed there. That if you had a team that was like the Sydney Drop Bears or something, if they were actually an Owl team, I feel like they couldn't genuinely live in Sydney because you just wouldn't get good scrim opportunities and you'd be so far away from the rest of the world. You would probably have to live somewhere in Southeast Asia, which you could also put a team in Southeast Asia instead. Have like a Taiwanese team or something like that. Anyway, those are some thoughts. America has enough. Dip says, how feasible is Shu for the South Korean flex support for the Overwatch World Cup? Oh, fuck! Well, I just knocked over my my water everywhere. I just went all over my phone, went all over my keyboard, all over my lap. So, cool. Let me just, my keyboard is dripping. Right, well, that's a classic Sideshow move. Gotta love it when those things happen. I'm gonna try and dry out my keyboard for a sec while I keep talking to you. Well. Alright, 2 seconds. You know, you win some, you lose some. That was an L. That was a big old L. See, I don't put it on for the stream. I am actually this moronic. Okay. Back to business. So how feasible is Shu for the South Korean flex support? In Plat chat, you only mentioned jjonak, Violet, and Twilight. I would say Twilight and jjonak are the are at the forefront for Team South Korea if I was running it. Violet would be very good if you want to run primarily Zen. He's also had a little bit... So, jjonak's had a few issues with his ultimates. His ults have been pretty weird. Not the nanos particularly, but the trances have been very strange at certain times. It seems like under pressure, jjonak cracks a little bit and his transcendence usage goes all over the place. Violet's positioning has been a little weird as well. He gets caught out a lot on Moira, and on Zen he occasionally gets caught out, and he hasn't really played enough Ana for me to be able to tell how good his Ana is. Twilight seems like the leading candidate. He's pretty perfect with a lot of his play. He doesn't quite have the explosive Zenyatta as jjonak and Twilight, but his Ana is very, very good, and overall a consistent player. Shu, I would be very interested to see how he could perform on a better roster. Guangzhou is pretty talented, but they've fucked up a lot of their teamwork over the course of this season. Shu's Ana seems like it's better than his Zen, but both are pretty nutty. I think those four are indisputably the top 4 flex supports in the league, and I think that at the very least it would be worth giving him a trial, because I haven't really noticed the same flaws in Shu as I have in jjonak and Twilight. jjonak and Violet. So it's possible that if you put him on a better team, he might crumble under the pressure, or he might step up to the plate. Morphy says, how hard do I have to clench my arsehole as a Dallas Fuel fan to survive for the rest of the season? Looking at the strength of the schedule, it's not very pretty. Very hard. Very, very hard. Clench that arsehole. So hard. I think Dallas Fuel are essentially out. I don't think they're even going to be able to make it into the 12th place play-in. And for a team that's currently sat at like the 10th spot or something at the moment, that's pretty fucking awful. The reason is, strength of schedule is pretty nuts because they're in the Pacific Division, but also, as things tend towards more DPS, Dallas Fuel are going to go downwards, I think. They lack coordination, they lack leadership on the team, but they also lack star power and flexibility in their DPS lineup, and that has been the case ever since Effect left, and they didn't really replace him with anybody. So, I think Dallas are out. I think Dallas have to be thinking pretty hard about rebuilding again for next year, and this time really focusing on the shit that matters. They've identified some core players to build around. They identified OG, Unco, we want to build around these guys. Seems like AKM as well. But with Trill coming into the lineup and them not having success with OG and AKM being the leadership figures for the team, I think they've got to think about bringing, kind of redefining what the core is of the Dallas Fuel. Instead of having a constant kind of ship of Theseus with this team, where they bring one player in and change a little something, and bring another player in and change a little something. And I think it might be time for a bit of a hard reset for Dallas, where you pick a couple of players and you jettison the dead weight, and you bring in people that complement and fit within the team culture of the people that you've defined as your franchise stars. Or maybe even bring in a new franchise star to build around and cut the players that don't fit with whoever they are. That would actually be my preferred method for Dallas. Pogey says, what are some things that have happened this Owl season so far that if you told yourself last season, you would have had a difficult time believing? I actually went through this question. I thought this was a really interesting one. I looked back at my old power rankings for preseason, and some of them are pretty off. Like, for example, having London up at the top along with Philadelphia, which I still think was a very reasonable prediction, given that I thought London had fixed a bunch of issues that were happening. I didn't think we'd be in the GOATS meta for this long, and they're in the easier Atlantic division. It might still come true throughout Stage 4 and playoffs, but for now it seems like London and Philly are shit in the bed. But okay, a lot of the predictions were pretty reasonable in my preseason power rankings, but there's a few things that I would have genuinely had a very difficult time believing. So here's a few. NYXL would only lose to Atlanta Reign in the regular season, but would do it twice. I mean, that is a fucking mind-boggling one, honestly. Like, NYXL have had 2 undefeated stages this season. And in the other one where they didn't, they lost to Atlanta Reign twice. That's fucking weird. Like, yes, they're just clowning on an Atlantic division that's really, really weak right now. But also, they beat a bunch of the better Pacific teams in Stage 1. And then slumped against Atlanta because they got red and they haven't been doing anything in the playoffs. It's been a very, very strange season for the NYXL. Titans would go 20-1 in the regular season and show no signs of slowing down. I thought Titans would be a top 4 team, but would suffer in the long term because they're in North America and would struggle to adapt to living in North America, playing a tournament style where it's like every day you're on the grind. I actually thought as well that the meta would shift away from GOATs and they'd be forced to react. And at that point, that's really where the experience of being in the Overwatch League would benefit other teams and wouldn't really benefit the Titans. The fact that Titans are 20-1 in the regular season is unbelievable coming into the season. Even if you thought they were an amazing team, which I did, they're going up against other amazing teams like NYXL, like Shock. Well, I thought London and potentially Philadelphia as well would be fantastic teams, and maybe they will be in Stage 4. But the fact that they show no signs of slowing down as well, the fact that they adapted in Stage 3 and were beaten by the Dragons, who ended up being the overall champions, but still looked like a pretty competent team, I think that's fairly crazy. Unbelievable levels of dominance from the Vancouver Titans. We thought we would never see a team like NYXL last season, and it's been more competitive at the top this year, and yet the Titans are still more dominant than NYXL were last season. Now, I also didn't believe that GOATs would be the dominant team composition for over half the season. I thought the GOATs would fall out of favor after about Stage 1. I thought there would be a fairly big balance patch between Stage 1 and Stage 2 that would contribute to a major shift in the meta. Now, there was a big balance patch. It didn't really contribute to a big shift in the meta in Stage 2. We kind of got a delayed onset effect from that and the map pool and maybe a couple of other factors in Stage 3. Even though GOATs is dominant, Chengdu still had success playing basically only Hammond. That, to me, is wild. That might be one of the most wild things that I wouldn't have believed coming into the season. Chengdu looked like a mess of a roster coming into this season. They had a main tank that couldn't play Winston. Never played Winston. But, by the way, in case you forgot, Eamon has never played Winston in his competitive career, basically. He's played like 20 minutes of it total across his entire career, and he's not very good at it. That is mind-blowing to me. He's also not that great on Reinhardt and just had to learn it as the season went on. And Chengdu's still having a reasonable amount of success, even in the Pacific Division as well. I mean, that's pretty scary, honestly. Because I thought Chengdu would be, I think, the 17th best team at the moment. They're still probably not going to make overall playoffs. like the play-in spot at 12th. They are going to be in the bottom quarter of the standings, I think. But still, no, wait, not bottom quarter. No, bottom third of the standings. Yeah, but still, that's pretty good from Chengdu. I also wouldn't have believed that the Shanghai Dragons would become arguably the best team in the world. I would have believed that Shanghai Dragons would be very good and might look fantastic in DPS metas around DM and Ding. Remember, they were my pick for potentially the best DPS duo coming into the league, and they've certainly shown it now that they can play the Pharah and the Widow, and DM and Ding both actually flexing onto the Sombra. I mean, they're looking like absolute freaks. But did I think they'd be arguably the best team in the world at the end of Stage 3? No, not really. Because I had questions about their off-tank role. Now, it turns out that we were playing a triple DPS kind of meta, and Youngjin was able to play Roadhog and stuff like that anyway, so they kind of worked their way around it, similarly to how they did in the Contenders final when they played against Runaway as Kongdu Panthera. Yeah, and I also didn't think their backline would be able to keep up in this same kind of way, but they absolutely have. So, absolute credit to the Shanghai Dragons for exceeding my already reasonable expectations about that team. And I also would have never believed, I would have fucking never believed in 1,000 years that Bren would dominate the talent takedown on Widowmaker. I mean, what the fuck kind of world are we living in? I think that proves we're in a simulation. babyblu says, who is your pick for Dennis Havelka's award this year? Off the top of my head, I can think of Gamsu, Extreme Kind Dad Energy, Sebiobi, Epic wideSBBhappy moment, okay, and Geguri, Turbo PMA only, frog memes, puns, and representing a whole gender as contenders for the award. I think my leading candidates at the moment would be Gamsu, because he is just an incredible positive influence, especially when you take into account stuff like taking Huxel hiking after Huxel had been rude to him and ranked, showing after 5 years of being a pro player that determination and grit can end up and hard work can end up leading you to becoming on the team that's arguably the best in the world at the moment right now. He's had a positive mental attitude throughout everything. As Avast pointed out on his Twitter, and as Avast knows because he played with Gamsu in Boston Uprising, Gamsu's been through some shit and still maintained that positive atmosphere. Boston Uprising was a shit show last year. A shit show. And Gamsu has never had anybody say anything bad about him. Gamsu, as far as I can tell, as far as I know, has just been the absolute personification of professionalism and balance in your life between that work and being able to have a life outside of it as well, and still be an older guy and have success and be able to help the younger generation, if you will, of Overwatch players. I think Gamsu is the leading candidate in my opinion. But my second candidate is actually not on babyblu's list here. My second candidate is Custer. Custer has been a very powerful positive force just for the league in general. He's incredibly professional. He's got a great knowledge of the game, interaction with fans. He's a great representative for the game in the same way that you might say somebody like Jake is. He's a great representative for Overwatch. Very well spoken, etc., etc. But he also has been a massive positive influence on the LA Valiant team, turning things around 2 seasons in a row. Last season, he was brought in alongside with Space. They turned that season around as a shot-calling leader for his team, was able to turn things around for them. This year as well, is very instrumental in turning the season around for the LA Valiant. And okay, that's not exactly what the Dennis Havelka Award is about. It's about positive influence in the community and with players, which is why I think Gamsu takes it above him. But Custer also is just such a great face of the league because he is involved in so much media stuff, like promotional material, and just gives off an incredible vibe of like having fun, being a balanced person, being fairly PMA, being a leadership figure for the rest of his team. He's an older guy on the team, the same as Gamsu is, helping them all stick together and maintain a positive attitude. The Valiant have also been supporting St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital against childhood cancer for the entirety of this year, I think, and Custer's essentially just been the spokesperson for that outreach kind of program within the LA Valiant, where he's doing like Custer News Network, advertising for the Kit Kat rivalry weekend, etc., but also the stuff about St. Jude's, like when he did that piece where he was doing Zoe's makeup, and it was just a lot of fun, and he's, you know, promoting the fact that they're raising money for St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. I think that's the kind of stuff that the Dennis Avelka Award was made for as well. It's for people like Custer who are doing stuff outside of just their role on the team, even though their role on the team is incredibly positive and had like an internet Hulk kind of persona where he's bringing people up and is the mentorship figure on that team. So I think the two leading candidates right now are Gamsu and Custer, hands down. I think Sabiobi is an interesting pick. He is incredibly positive, and I love that he's battled through and stuff like that, but he's also been on the bench for the majority of the season, and I haven't really seen that much from him. But sure, I think is one of the people that I would have up there. Geguri, I haven't even seen all year long, so apart from, you know, her Twitter, where it does seem, you know, kind of funny, and the fact that genuinely is an inspiration for a lot of women who are trying to get into gaming, or girls that are trying to get into gaming as well, to see her up there on a professional team that is doing incredibly well right now, albeit with her not actually on the starting lineup. But I don't think that's enough, actually, for the Dennis Avelka Award this year. And I'm really not sure that Sabiobi's done enough either. I haven't really seen enough from either of those, but particularly Geguri, because she's been on the bench the entire year and hasn't really, I don't know, been involved in that much stuff outside of her own social media presence. But by far and away, my two leading candidates are Gamsu and Custer. Tygur Triple says, I've barely watched any Stage 3 games due to just general owl fatigue. 2 stages of GOATs didn't help much, although I hear things have improved. Yes, they have massively improved. This was also a while ago that this question was asked, so this was just when the first rumors of Stage 3 being interesting were starting to pervade the general populace. How do you deal with burnout? Tygur Triple asks. Overwatch or OWL related or in general? Now, I mentioned this at the top of the video, but essentially the way that I deal with burnout is I only take on things that I enjoy. Like, I enjoy streaming, I enjoy my work, I enjoy the Casters and Castle stuff, I enjoy the podcast that we do, Plat Chat and Foreheads. And I deal with burnout by cutting stuff that I don't enjoy, which I hate to say it to you, but the subscriber Q&A is one of those weird things. Like, if I could redesign the subscriber Q&A, I would just do it live. I would just do it live so that it's incorporated with my streaming, so that at least then it's going up on my Twitch channel as well as my YouTube, and I get to like double dip the two. Because something and also streaming has been something that I've also cut as well. Not because I don't like it, but because it takes too much time, which is also something that's a fair criticism of my subscriber Q&A, is that they tend to be an hour long, and it's not as fun as doing an hour-long podcast or an hour-long stream or something like that. But I think it's good content, so I'm happy to make it. It's just, it hasn't been as regular as I would have liked it to be. But yeah, I would totally be getting burnt out right now if I had been trying to stream 3 times a week at the same time as working 4 days a week and producing a bunch of content on Mondays and Tuesdays. And months ago, got into a relationship and have been spending more time involved with that. So there's just a lot of shit going on in my life, and that's necessitated me cutting stuff back. And the main things that I've cut back are socializing on, or just not socializing, but chilling out on Mondays and Tuesdays. Normally after people work, like if someone worked the hours that we work Thursday through Sunday, I think most people would spend Monday and Tuesday. Sorry, I also work on the Wednesday as well. So Wednesday through Sunday, if they were working that much, they'd probably just want to chill out on the Monday and Tuesday, treat it like their weekend. But I've kind of morphed my brain into being like, oh, today's the day that I get to have fun with other projects. So I do that stuff instead. So that's one way that I deal with burnout, is just having fun making stuff, and then cutting back on other things, like cutting back on watching TV shows or just chilling out, or having, days where I just go out and drink and socialize with people, but also the streaming I've had to cut back on, because otherwise I would just get fucking toasted. My brain would be fried. turbobrick says, how high do you think you could rank up in Overwatch if you actually tryharded and took competitive seriously? I ask because after watching your stream, it seems your questionable gameplay is actually done on purpose, fully knowing that your actions will adversely affect your team's chance at winning. So I'm just curious to know. You can't catch me like that, Jeff. You can't make me admit to throwing on stream just like that. Turbobrick. Yeah, sure, Turbobrick. Turbo Kaplan. Oakie translated the question afterwards in my sub-Discord saying, how hard do you throw? That's that question translated. No, my questionable gameplay isn't... I mean, sometimes I do things because I think they'll be funny. Like, I'll go and flank because I think it has some chance of success, but it's just like, it's a fun way of playing the game. Not because it's just funny for viewers, but because I find it entertaining to play like that. Like, I don't think you have to play your fucking 100% every time you get into a ranked game. I know there are people that genuinely believe that, but I think that's such a ridiculous idea to have. That there would be like a ranked game mode where you absolutely have to put your 100% into everything, and if people aren't communicating all the time and acting as if they're in a team, that they are throwing the game or something, or being bad teammates. At the end of the day, the game is for fun. The ranked portion of it is just to add to the fun element and make people take it more seriously and have more fun in the game. At the end of the day, if you're playing with a team and the rest of your team enjoyed the game, even though you ended up losing a bunch, that's fine. I mean, that's what the fucking game is for. It's for having fun. It's an entertainment product. So I will do things that I find to be fun. That's how I used to play TF2 as well. Not so much when I played in a team, but even then, sometimes I would just get the urge to do something and I'd go and do something dumb just because I thought it was entertaining. I thought it was a fun way of playing the game. But yeah, when I would play TF2, like I'd try and make... I generally try and do the thing that shouldn't work, but just to see if it will work. You know, like hiding in a bush so that you can try and jump out at somebody and get a kill. All right, it wasn't the best percentage play in the world to make, but it's fun. It's entertaining. Now, how high do I think I could actually rank up in Overwatch if I try-harded and took competitive seriously? If I was playing 8 hours a day and really try-harded and got a positional coach or something and stuff like that, I think I could probably make high masters, or maybe even GM. I mean, if you looked at my gameplay now and I said that would just be absolutely ridiculous. But I've had times in my past where I played a competitive title seriously, and I know roughly what it takes and what kind of type of effort would be required for me to reach that kind of level, and I just can't be fucked. It's way less fun to do that, and it's way less fun to fuck around at that kind of level than it is to fuck around in like a diamond level as well. But also, it's just, I don't really find it that fun to try hard. And I don't have the time to do it either. It's perfectly possible as well that I would just get hard stuck in diamond. But it seems unlikely. Formation says, if Bren held a gun to your head and told you had to 1v1 an Owl Pro on a hero of your choice, who would it be and on what character? Well, I would say, Bren, put the gun down, because I've already 1v1'd Owl Pros before. I 1v1'd Finzi on Zenyatta, and he won 5-4. But I would do it like this. I would pick somebody who I believe has no mechanical skill, like Fusions. I'm calling you out, Fusions. And I'd challenge them to a Pharah 1v1. And I would hope that they don't just have a random pocket pick of Pharah available and they have just been carried by their brain all of these years on main tank. So, yeah, that's the kind of thing that I would do. I would challenge Custer to a Pharah 1v1 or Fusions to a Zen 1v1 or something like that. babyblu says, what's the worst thing a stranger has ever done to you intentionally? What about unintentionally? I wanted to include this question even though I have no answer for it, just because I want to explain why I've got no answer for it. I can't remember. I was racking my brain. I can't remember anything. I can't remember the worst thing anyone's done to me intentionally ever. Like, I guess my first girlfriend broke up with me on my birthday. That's kind of shitty, I guess. But things weren't going very well, and it's completely understandable now. So, I don't know. I can't think of the worst thing that anyone, even somebody I know, has done to me intentionally or unintentionally. And I think the reason that I'm by the way, I'm pouring myself a drink. That's why my hand's randomly in front of the screen. I think the reason that I can't remember bad things that have been done to me is just because that's the way I've coded my brain, is to literally forget things that are bad that happen to me. I don't focus on them. I don't complain about them. I don't relive bad moments. I sometimes relive embarrassing moments or things that I regret that I did, but I never relive things that other people did to me. I view them as just unimportant, utterly unimportant. The only thing that really matters is your reaction to things, not really what other people do to you. Especially because people are very easily manipulated in that sense. Like, maybe manipulated seems like a callous way of putting it, but people who are shitty to you, there are very easy ways generally of making them not be shitty to you. And I don't mean like fucking getting the mafia on them or giving them an offer they can't refuse. But I just mean by changing how you interact with people, I've found that even the least likable people can, you can end up having good interactions with them. And I also haven't lived a particularly difficult life. I'm sure it's also fucking equal parts reasonable amounts of privilege just by being a white cis hetero dude in the UK. So yeah, I don't really have an answer because I can't think of any things that have happened to me that negatively. I have had a pretty chill life, but also there have been things that I've struggled with or bad things that have happened to me, but I don't really live them, and I can't really think of any specific examples. I mean, they must have happened, but I can't remember them because they're gone. Oakie says, sportsmanship in esports. Is it on an equal level as regular sports? Is it on an equal level of importance? From what I've seen, people are a lot more petty in esports, and there's a lot less backlash if someone does show bad sportsmanship. There are a number of very key differences between sports and esports, and the ones that are most relevant to this discussion are, I think, two major factors. One, sports involve interacting with other people's physical bodies a lot. Esports don't. If you are a dick in a contact sport like rugby or like American football or basketball, I suppose basketball's supposed to be a non-contact sport, but you know, such is life. Or football, you know, what you guys call soccer. If you are not sportsmanlike in those sports, you have a higher chance of genuinely harming somebody on the other team, physically harming them. You might repeatedly tackle them in an unsportsmanlike matter, and they end up snapping their ankle or twisting their knee or something. You might deliberately piss someone off so that they go for something that they shouldn't do, and they end up hurting themselves and they fall on their head or some shit. I don't know. The point there, though, is that sportsmanship in sports, I think, is partly to do with the fact that everybody's got a group responsibility for keeping everybody else safe. And a lot more rules have been introduced recently in sports like rugby and the NFL to keep players safe, to make sure that they have to follow the rules and aren't just bound by sportsmanship so that they can reduce injuries between their players. I think another big factor, though, is that in sports, generally there are rules which are difficult to regulate and are on the players in some sense to self-regulate or on officials to regulate. Like, for example, if somebody's offside in football, that's something that a linesman has to flag. In theory, they could do it by with computers so that it was correct every time, like it is in esports. There is no need for an official, a referee, a linesman, anything like that in esports. They have them so that people don't cheat, right? They're there watching them to arbitrate anything that, like somebody's mouse breaks or somebody has somehow managed to smuggle hacks onto the live LAN and they're using a USB stick or something. But 90% of the time, they don't really do anything. They are in no sense used as much as general sports referees and this kind of stuff. But sportsmanship in sports is also designed because the rules are much more vague. Because you're not creating the universe. You can't have a football pitch that you design without a lot of technology to auto flag every penalty. I mean, if you tried to automate soccer rules with the pitch itself, if you're imagining like the game and the server that we play in for Overwatch or the pitch or the stadium that they're in, I mean, if someone's mouthing off to someone or someone punches someone on the pitch, how do you arbitrate that unless you have an official there to dictate that was a penalty of some sort? But inside the world of esports, there can't really be vagaries about these kind of things. There are clearly defined rules, and it's impossible most of the time to even circumvent those rules. Let me try and use an example to make my point much more clear. In soccer, you're not allowed to hit the ball with your hand unless you're the goalkeeper. In Overwatch, you are not allowed to use a sound barrier as a zenyatta, but you're just not even given the option. There is no ability for you to cheat outside of what you are given. So the degrees of freedom are much less in esports, and so you don't even have the option to foul in a lot of different ways. The only real foul that you could do in the Overwatch League is like, I don't know, if you went over and like punched one of the other players on the other side of the fucking court or something, but why would you even be interacting with them? I mean, that's just an outrageous example. Or unless you are actually using cheats themselves, which modify the game and allow for more degrees of freedom for you to actually have fouls. But you see what I mean? Like, the idea of sportsmanship is different in sports because there are much more vague requirements on the players. They have the responsibility to keep everyone safe. They have the responsibility to make sure the game is played by the rules. In esports, that tends to just be the job of the game itself, or you don't have a responsibility to keep everyone safe because there's no chance of anyone getting injured in the first place. If you mean stuff like teabagging people, then I don't think that's even bad sportsmanship at all. I think that's just a bit of banter, so that's why I didn't talk about it even slightly in that question. Cadden James T. King says, who's got the best jawline amongst all the Owl players? It's Gamsu. It's Gamsu. It's Gamsu. And if you don't believe it's Gamsu, you're wrong. It's Gamsu. Morphy says, where would you put Dallas Fuel if they were in the Atlantic Division? Would they be in a stronger position than they are currently? Both literally in their league position and form, mental, etc., etc. Okay, let's assume we took all of the Pacific rematches they have. So remember, if you're in the Pacific Division like Dallas Fuel are, you play everyone inside your division twice. So you play all the Pacific teams twice, all the Atlantic teams once. So let's take all the times that Dallas have played Pacific teams twice, that second time they played them, and let's flip them into Atlantic rematches. So they had a loss to the Seoul Dynasty, a win against the Shanghai Dragons, a loss to the Vancouver Titans, and a loss to Chengdu. So those would be turned into, for example, another match against Fusion, another match against Boston, another match against Toronto, another match against Paris. So they actually won all of those matches against Fusion, Boston, Toronto, Paris the first time around. So their record, the Dallas Fuel, if they were in the Atlantic and they had rematched the teams that they played the first 4 times of the Atlantic again, which wouldn't quite be the case, but it's a decent way of theorizing it, I think, their record would be 13-8. So their current record is 10-11, and their new record would be 13-8. So that would put them at 5th place overall right now, or 6th, depending on how the map differential would play out with the LA Gladiators. That's the best case scenario. You know, they might have lost that rematch against Fusion. They might have, I mean, we're not factoring in the fact that they might have had a rematch against New York or against London, games that they're more likely to lose. That's also not factoring in the fact that Dallas Fuel tended to dip downwards throughout Stage 2 and Stage 3, not just due to their strength of schedule, but also the team itself was slipping. They were undoubtedly performing better at the beginning of the season. That's the best case scenario. But their matches moving forward in Stage 4 would also be easier as well. So, yeah, the Dallas Fuel would probably be currently sat in the standings at around the 5th place. if they were in the Atlantic Division. But that doesn't mean they're actually the 5th best team in the league, or that they deserve that 5th place spot or anything like that, because they would have overtaken Shanghai, Seoul, and the Gladiators on that jump up to the 5th place spot. And all 3 of those teams are in the Pacific Division, and they would benefit if they were in the Atlantic Division. So you can't just make the case that Dallas Fuel would be in 5th if they were in the Atlantic, because you're ignoring the fact that a bunch of other teams would be in 5th, or even better if they were in the Atlantic. So it's unfair to say that. It's more fair, perhaps, to try and figure out some estimate of what would have happened if every team played every other team twice this year. If it was just a pure round robin like it was last year. Or, last year it was almost a pure round robin. You missed out one team every stage, but it was more reasonable than it is this year. So yeah, but the Dallas Fuel would undoubtedly look better in the standings if they're in the Atlantic Division. That's just how these things go. That's also how things in sports work. But unfortunately, there isn't really a workaround if you are trying to become a geolocated esport, because you need to play different amount of teams, different amount of times. Otherwise, you're just going to be doing far too much flying throughout the year. The travel would just kill players. Formation says, if you could be an analyst or caster for any esport that isn't TF2 or Overwatch, with a guaranteed gig at its World Championship or equivalent, which would it be? Well, for starters, I don't think right now I could be an analyst or caster for any esport at a World Championship for another game. I don't think I'm at that kind of level for any other game. I don't know another game as well, because I've spent so much time doing Overwatch. Could I be at another game? Yeah, absolutely. I totally believe that I could pick up basically any other esport and be at a level where I could be an analyst or caster for that game. I just chose Overwatch because it was the most natural intro for somebody that didn't have that much experience. It was a brand new game and it fed in well from TF2. But if I could pick, say the World Championship was in like 5 months and I had 5 months to prep, then I'd love to do CS. I think CSGO is a fantastic esport. I love it. I enjoy watching all of it. I love the drama, the intrigue, the storylines and narratives that play out around the scene. I love the open tournament system that they have. I like the banter that they have, the amount of time they get to talk about the games on the desk, the community's enjoyment of in-depth analysis and this kind of stuff, the way the map picks work out. I'm a big fan. I also would love at some point in the future to try and do some stuff for Dota Underlords. I'm going to really hardcore get into Dota Underlords, I think. I'm already fucking addicted to the game, so I might as well make use of that fact. And maybe if not work on it, then maybe just do some supplementary content for it. Maybe fly out to some local events and do some journalist work for it, like I started when I was doing Overwatch, this kind of stuff, because I enjoy doing that. I think I'm a pretty good interviewer. So yeah, those would be the games. I'm not really interested in League of Legends. Rocket League's kind of intriguing, but doesn't really grab me in the same way that those do. What else? Honestly, I know you didn't say sports, you said esports, but I would much rather get into sports, honestly. I mean, I'm a big tennis fan. I enjoy watching tennis so much. I have done ever since I was young. And learning sports and how the strategy of that shifts, and each individual player tends to have a very different style, because the degrees of freedom are way larger with human bodies than they are with characters in a game. So the stylistic differences tend to be much larger as well, and the narratives and the personality is much easier to tap into, because you're seeing the human right there in front of you. So yeah, I'd enjoy getting into sports analysis as well. Captain James T. King says, Sideshow, how did it feel to say Bukake on the pre-show on the second day of the Atlanta Homestand? I never said Bukake on the pre-show. I actually said Cupcake, because I thought that was how the person's name was pronounced. Apparently it's Cupcake, and they're a trap artist. I don't know, but their name looks like it should be pronounced Cupcake. And so that's all I said. And Bren told me to shut up. Dip says, how do you rate the Shanghai Dragons backline? Is Luffy a top 3 Ana? The Shanghai Dragons backline has been a revelation, honestly, in the last couple of weeks. It's really stepped up. Luffy's Zen isn't that great, but his Ana is really good. And Koma looks way more at home playing Mercy than he does playing the Lucio. His Lucio's all right, but his Mercy is very well coordinated with the rest of the team. Really nice reses. And I don't mean that that's all him. Obviously, it's mostly to do with how he tells his team to set up for him, or how his team sets it up for him, and the communication about when he goes in and stuff. That's not necessarily just Coma, but his Mercy has looked very, very good for that team, especially in a meta that should be pretty easy to punish Resurrects. But the question is Luffy a top 3 Ana? I don't think he is. I think really when you look at the Ana players, Twilight has to be number 1. The guy's a fucking freak. He's got such great angles, keeps everyone alive, safe positioning, never out of position. His nano boosts are fantastic. I mean, he basically invented the peeling style of nano boosting with Bumper. Also gets great value out of them when they tend to play aggressive. Very, very talented. Sleep darts also massively on point. In the games where they played against the LA Valiant, he was getting the same amount of sleep darts as Kareev. They just weren't on as high value targets, and they weren't on the cam as often. Second place in terms of Anas, he tends to fly under the radar, but it's jjonak. It absolutely is. jjonak's Ana might even be better than his Zen at this point. We have to start asking that question, because jjonak's Transcendence usage has been suffering a little bit, and he has still been having explosive results with his Zen, but there are other people in the league that are starting to catch up. But jjonak, just pound for pound mechanically, is probably the best mechanical flex support that we have in the league, even now when he's playing a lot more Ana. He's phenomenal. He basically tops the charts statistically on everything in Ana. He shares the number 1 and the number 2 spot with Twilight on a couple of stats, but he's number 1 more often than not. Certainly on the more important stuff as well. The guy's a freak of nature. His team do build around him, but he's a freak. Kareev as well, you have to put him up there. Just the Sandman himself. Putting people to sleep left, right, and center. Always high-value targets, difficult shots to hit. The guy's a fucking nut. You heard the LA Valiant say it. They think Zen is actually favored in the direct Sombra v Sombra matchup, but Kareev's just so good at Ana that they have to put him in that role. Then I think it comes Luffy and Shu. At that point, it's Luffy and Shu as the Ana players. Shu, I think, would look a lot better on a better team, which is why I don't quite want to put Luffy above him, like, categorically, but I think probably Luffy then Shu. We'll see though. If Luffy's able to have more success moving forwards as the Guangzhou Charge look better, reminder that they actually beat the Shanghai Dragons recently, then perhaps we'll be singing the praises of Shu once again. But Shu's Ana looks better than his Zen, but his Zen is better. As a flex support, Shu is definitely better than Luffy as a flex support all round. Shu's Zenyatta is a lot better than Luffy's, I think. But the Ana is fairly similar between them. But yeah. Pogey says, is Striker the scrim god of DPS? People always hype up his abilities in scrims or ranked, but every time he's on stage for the Shock this season, he's underperformed. Well, let's consider the situations in which he was even fielded for the Shock. He was fielded in map 5s on Busan early on in the season in stage 1, where they played against like the Gladiators, and I think they played against NYXL as well, but I'm not, that might be incorrect, where he was just fielded as part of a weird strategy that they ran solely on Busan, where he was supposed to play Widowmaker, but teams would always play counter strats that forced him to play Zarya. And at that point, the team kind of struggled, underperformed. He wasn't really supposed to be a Zarya player. I don't think it's fair to look at those and think that that's a representation of how Striker would perform if he had a starting roster role on the team. Again, when Striker was subbed in for the finals, when they played against the Shanghai Dragons in stage 3, he's played... Yes, he's presumably been able to scrim because the team knew what roster they were going to field and knew what map they were going to be playing. But they can't have had much time to be able to figure out they're even playing against Shanghai in the finals. So it's not like Striker's been playing it for weeks and weeks. He's just been playing a lot of Widowmaker in ranked and stuff. But Striker himself performed reasonably well in that map. The map was close. They nearly won it. They didn't quite. There's no way of knowing what Shock's normal lineup would have looked like on Oasis. They might have won. They might have lost. Who the fuck knows? It's actually impossible to tell. And I think it's very unfair to look at Striker and how he's been utilized in the Shock and say that he's only a scrim god and doesn't perform when he's in matches. The way that the San Francisco Shock have just been focused on a 6-man roster, he is not being put in a position to succeed. But he's still had some level of success, and clearly he's good enough that they feel comfortable putting him in at certain times and be confident that he's going to individually pop off. So if he does get fielded in stage 4, I'm pretty confident that he's going to look like a very good player and not just like a scrim god. He certainly wasn't a scrim god last year. He was a fucking nutter. Okay, 2 last questions. babyblu says, what is something you don't like but you wish you did like for an auxiliary reason? For example, I wish I liked non-FPS games so I could play with my friends. There's a couple of things that spring to mind here. One of them is networking. I really, really, really hate networking. I mean, like meeting people you've never met who work in some other, like say it's some, they work for Twitch, for example, and you're having a beer at the end of an after party after E3 or something, and you're like, oh, hey, what do you do? Oh, yeah, this is what I'm... That drains my soul. I can't do it. It fucking hurts me. If I find someone that's really entertaining and we can avoid the small talk, great, fantastic. But most of the time, the small talk is monotonous. Most people are not engaging in, at least in esports, with how they describe their job, even though a lot of jobs in esports I find very interesting. Most people are terrible at describing their job in an interesting way, including me, because I think it's like a very British thing to downplay what you do. So I end up, you know, not being particularly great in those scenarios either. But I just fucking hate networking, and it's a huge part of my job. What else? Working out, I suppose. Going to the gym or just exercising in general when there's no purpose to it really, really fucking bores me. I love playing sports because it feels like there's a purpose. It feels like there's an end goal to what you're trying to do. Just going for a run, especially on a treadmill where you're not even getting the benefit of going out and seeing some beautiful countryside. I'll go for a run if it's like also like involved in a hike or we're going out somewhere beautiful. I'll go cycling if we're just cycling around some incredible scenery. But running on a treadmill or lifting weights or something like that, I cannot think of anything more boring. I wish I did like it though, because it would allow me to go to the gym with a bunch of the other Owlcaster people that do it and stay healthy. But for now, I have to try and persuade them to play sports with me. Otherwise, I die of boredom. I will die of boredom. Another connected one, I suppose, is like eating healthily. I wish I really had a thing for eating healthily, but I don't. I fucking love unhealthy food. And then I suppose the final one is one that's more to do with my youth. But like generally speaking, clubbing and like going out to like concerts and stuff like that. Recently, or not recently, but over the last like 3-4 years or something, I'd say I've been out to like a club or like a fucking big concert maybe 20 times, something like that, and I've enjoyed about half of those. So I really don't go out to them that often because I know I don't enjoy them that much. And even when I do go out, I only enjoy it about half the time. You really need I need a great group of people to go out with, and I have to be sufficiently drunk to not give a fuck. But yeah, I something has never really gripped me about having fun in environments where you can't talk to each other. You know, like I'm out with people where I'm friends with them because I enjoy talking with them and interacting with them. And we're going to go somewhere where the music is so loud that I can't talk to you anymore. And we're just going to dance for hours instead. And that can occasionally be very entertaining. And I like it every now and then, as I said. But yeah, has to be with the right group of people, and I'm not a big fan. And that, when I was at university, was a bit weird, so I would stay in a lot of the time instead of going out. But then when I went out, I generally enjoyed it, so I don't know. This is just me talking to myself, wondering whether I should have gone out more in uni, I suppose. I'm going to go with no. Don't really give a fuck. All right, Captain James T. King says, do you have any hobbies you haven't explored yet but are interested in trying? I bet there's tons, but there's a few that come to the top of my head, but there's also a few that are ones that I have tried that I would rather just spend more time on them rather than trying different stuff. The ones that I haven't really got into that I really wanted to, though, are cooking. I think cooking's just an incredible life skill that everybody should have, and it's something I enjoy doing, but I've never really gotten into it. I have, you know, like maybe 10 meals that I am very comfortable making, and I tend to rotate through them and stuff. But I wouldn't say that I'm comfortable with like experimenting with different recipes. I can follow a recipe perfectly fine and I can cook, but I would much rather learn how to do it in a way where you can improvise on recipes and have fun and enjoy doing it and actually create things that are more than just very standard basic meals, which is what I currently do. Another one is woodworking. I used to do woodworking with my family when I was younger, not in a incredibly in-depth sense, but my parents have made tables and chairs and chess sets and tree houses and all sorts of different things. And I've helped them out with various stuff, and I've built a couple of tree houses for my little brother and sister and helped out with various other projects and stuff like that. And I love working with wood. It's a fantastic medium to work with. And it's been one of my passions for a while now, that if I have a bunch of free time to buy a couple $1,000 of woodworking tools and have a project and work on it, whether that be a new desk, because currently that was actually my plan at the beginning of this year, was to get rid of this plastic desk that I have and to make one myself out of like a butcher's block or something, or maybe, you know, a bunch of planks, or I don't fucking know, but I haven't had the time. So maybe next year, maybe in the off season, something like that. Maybe I could do it on stream even. We'll see. Another one is writing. I enjoy writing a lot. I love the craft that's involved with spinning phrases in text and trying to evoke emotion or trying to convey a point. I think it's much more of an art form than speaking is. You can get away with a lot more in speaking. If you actually, what's even the word? If you wrote down everything that I've said over the course of this video, it would kind of look like a 5-year-old had written it, I think. The majority of the time, the way that people speak isn't as articulate as the way that people write. And there are higher standards for the written word than they are for the spoken word. And I think there's just something beautiful about writing and, especially involved with making people feel emotion. So even though I really enjoyed doing a lot of written work for like opinion pieces around Overwatch and esports and stuff like that, something I've wanted to do for a while is just write alternative stuff, not necessarily grounded in esports. Just try and flex some writing expertise to, you know, maybe take a story from my youth and write about it, or maybe I don't know. I'm literally just talking shit off the top of my head now, but like I don't know, life experiences, or maybe some comedy writing or something like that. I don't know. And then there's a bunch of hobbies that I already enjoy doing but don't really spend that much time doing, and I know that I would get deep satisfaction out of them. Reading, for example, I've got a whole book list that I'm trying to work my way through, but it's low priority in terms of what I spend my time doing. It's actually almost at the bottom in terms of my priority list. It probably should be higher, but at the moment I'm trying to, you know, kind of fixed on some other stuff in my life. My guitar as well. I came when I was stuck in the UK because my visa wasn't was taking a while to get processed. I was playing a lot more guitar. I relearned a bunch of songs that I haven't learned in ages. Since I moved to the US, I've maybe picked up my guitar about 10 times over the course of, how long has it been? 4 months. So yeah, I've really let that slip, and I've probably forgotten a bunch of stuff that I learned when I was in the UK. So yeah, that I get great satisfaction out of playing guitar. So I will I'll have to pick that up at some point, but so many things with such little time. The others is just like sports. Like I love playing squash and basketball and badminton, so I'm desperately trying to get other people to play those with me in the US, in LA, because it's good for your health and it's also incredibly entertaining, and I find it a wonderful thing to try and hone, is like your body's movement and your mastery and control over a ball or a shuttlecock or whatever the hell you happen to be playing with. And mountain biking as well is something that I really love and got into big time because both of my parents are pretty into it, especially my mum. And when I was in the UK most recently, again, when my visa was stuck, I had more time to work on a bunch of hobbies, and I started to get pretty good at mountain biking. So I'd love to get back into that, but I don't even have a bike in the US. So that one's definitely at the bottom of the list. Anyway, thank you very much for tuning in to the subscriber Q&A number 8. The next one will be coming at some point, hopefully within the next 2 weeks, so that I can start to, you know, the average so far has been every 16 days, just over every 16 days. So if I can get that average down to every 2 weeks, every 14 days, I'll feel much better about myself. So I'll maybe post one in a week after. I imagine there will be a lot of questions once our Watchpoint Stage 4 preview on Thursday airs, so perhaps that would then be a good time on the Monday following that to do a couple more questions from subscribers. In fact, I've already seen some that I will perhaps address next Monday. But until then, I will see you on stream. And if you have any questions, sub to my stream, twitch.tv/sideshow. You can use your Twitch Prime, ever heard of that? And you can follow the link in the description below to get to my Discord, and it will auto-connect, and you'll be invited to the sub-channel.